Welcome to our conversations on teams. Again, full disclosure, I have a very strong bias about the need for teams in organizations today. One of the comments that I make when I work with executives on the need for teams is I start with a real ingratiating comment. Given the world that we're in today, given the challenges that you're facing, the conclusion that I've drawn is you're just simply not smart enough to deal with it. That the levels of complexity today are beyond your intellectual and emotional bandwidth, and you need to be willing to reach out. And even if you have a good organization to a great organization, again, complexity is going to drive you into the need for alliances and teams. So let's start with the blocking and tackling again, team formation. Going back to our conversation on change, you're dealing in a very volatile, uncertain, ambiguous environment. And the projection that most of what you'll draw from reading your trade publications, and if you get into more academic type reading, there's nothing on the horizon that's going to indicate stability. So this is our real world. It's going to require our ability to live with high degrees of complexity. We're going to be connected, whether we like it or not, to the outside world on a very regular basis. And things are going to be very volatile. We're not going to have nice, steady change over a long period of time that's linear. The rates of change and the speed in which it occurs is going to be hard for us to predict, so we have to create the emotional ability to live in that space and the organizations that are comfortable operating in that space. So from my perception of what's going on is we need to learn how to work as a team. We need to learn to use the power of systems, both organizational-wide systems and community-wide systems and societal-wide systems to approach the issues that are in front of us. The idea of a single person or a single department being able to address this complexity, I think, is a work of fiction. And again, we talked before about how do we do this. We need to build teams in a way that operate on what we discussed before, the concepts of trust, the concepts of failure, the concepts of high degrees of cooperation. So again, you can go back to our change conversation if you want to get a refreshing view of that. Denhart, his wife, and another gentleman down at USC did some really interesting work on organizations today. And they said that to manage a team environment, we need to take a look at doing these things. So as a manager or a leader, our job is to articulate what's going on, reinforce the need for interdependence within our organization, set clear goals for our teams, commit to those goals. We put our political capital and our financial capital behind that team. We train the team in a way where they share common language and common models to do that. In doing seminars, this is a concept that gets a little fuzzy sometimes, so just a quick story. Worked with an organization that wanted their unions to get on board with the tough situation they were in. And what they did, I thought was absolutely brilliant, is they said to their entire company, we are going to run workshops in the evenings and on Saturday morning to teach you how to read our financial statements. So the whole organization, those that were interested in it, were able to have the same mental model that the leaders of the organization had when it came time to negotiate labor contracts or to deal with budget and resource allocation. So that's what we mean by shared mental models. Again, you need team members that have at their core similar values. As we talked about in another slide, it's their real core values that matter. It's not the way they do things. Those can be very different, and you want difference. But you want people that share a core value. You want to provide opportunities for people to work in teams. You provide protected space for your teams. What we mean by that is you provide the political cover for your team so they can disrupt your organization. They're going to get a lot of heat when they start to have a barbecue and on the menu are your sacred cows. We have to set up boundary management for your teams so the team knows exactly where within the organization they're operating, and they know what other teams are working on or other individuals are working on, and they have their swim lane very, very clearly set forth for them. You need to give them feedback on how they're doing. You need the challenge that the team is addressing is an outside challenge. You don't want them attacking other people within the organization. And you provide a support system, the resources, the financial support, the leadership to get things done. So I thought Denhart did a nice job of giving us a roadmap on how we manage and lead a team. So how do we form a team? Here is your model for the future, that we need to allow teams to form, so they need to get oriented on what their task is. They need to go through a storming stage where there's some conflict. They need to then set their norms on what's going on. They need to set up an environment where they can get things done. And then they need to adjourn. So as a manager, as a leader, we got to allow these different stages to evolve and lead our teams through each of those. I would add another step before the forming step, and that's the selection step. I would suggest that you spend a lot of time deciding who should be on the team. So you're very artful in team composition. So if you have the right composition, then you would start on Tuckman's journey through these different stages. So let's take a look at some of these in a bit more detail. The Google organization, I think some of you may have heard of them. They tend to have more money than the state of California, probably part of the nation. And they were very curious on why it was that some of the teams that they put together performed very well. And why was it that some teams were not as effective as others? And Charles Duhigg wrote a very interesting book, Smarter, Better, Faster. And again, a nice read for you. He writes in a very readable way. And he said what Google does in their high-performing teams is they build what he calls psychological safety. And that's where people connect at a very human level. And I'll share a short story that came out of that book. There was one individual in Google that had a reputation of really putting together teams. And even going into teams that were dysfunctional. Very smart people, very dedicated to Google's mission, but they just were not connecting. And Duhigg went in and interviewed him and said, well, how do you do it? And the Aristotle team said, how do you do this? And he said, it's very simple, that before we talk about the technical side of our assignment as a team, we do a half-day retreat, and we don't need to go to an elaborate resort or some other exotic part of the world. We just find a quiet space within our campus, and we get together for 4 hours. And that 4 hours is spent getting to know each other. And he said, we after we've done some around-the-table stuff, we start a conversation around what struggle have you faced? And this particular leader said, I will start the conversation. And he said, I've been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And it's progressed to the point where it's not operable. And I don't want the invasive treatment that may extend my life for a month or two. So they tell me I have between 6 months to a year of being able to fully function. And I choose to spend this time with you on this team to accomplish our mission. And then they go around the team and each person shares their story. And being good researchers, the Aristotle team then went back and interviewed the individual members of teams that had been under this particular person's leadership. And the comments were consistent. They said, once we know each other's life stories, and we know the struggles that our team members have faced, everything else seems pretty petty. And we don't get distracted by the petty stuff. So This was really enlightening for me because I always thought the forming stage was kind of a kumbaya moment. And this opened my eyes to understand that it's far deeper than that. So again, a nice little model for you. People share their values. This is what I stand for. This is my life's journey, which helps shape my beliefs on how the world operates, which then generates my assumptions of if I do X, Y will occur, and my assumptions then drive my action. So we're very transparent with each other in our teams on this particular model. If you're doing this, you don't have to be this academic or this touchy-feely, but hopefully this will drive the conversation for you. Within the storming stage, accept the fact that there's going to be conflict. In California, I think it's a state law, it may even be in our Constitution, that conflict is illegal. That it's inappropriate for us to show our anger or our disappointment or any intensity. But in the rest of the world, they operate where conflict is okay. And in fact, it's a healthy way for a team to function. So Denhart again gives us a nice little map on if you have conflict in your organization, how do you get it at an appropriate level? And he said one cause of conflict is people have frustrated needs, either personal needs or operational needs. Then you as a leader, you got to provide ways to satisfy those needs. People may generate conflict because they don't know what the heck they're doing. And their job has moved past their skill set, so now your job is to become a teacher to get them the skills. There may be weak relationships between the people within your team, and again, your job as a manager or leader is to build bridges between those individuals. Again, go back to the forming stage, go back to the Aristotle story. Conflicting interests, again, have that conversation around core values and you become the mediator to try to get those on the table and deal with them. And then there may be disputed rights. Well, my job description says X, I want to do X. Well, you then may have to step in as the arbitrator and say no, that at this particular stage in the organization or this project, we're going to reallocate decision rights or budgets or whatever happens to be going on. It may be unequal power, and again, your job is to equalize it. Somebody may have been damaged in the past and they're still carrying that hefty bag around. Your job is to help heal them. Where there's no action being taken, which is causing conflict, you call it out. Say, wait a minute, we haven't done a darn thing for a week. Let's get things going. And again, we talked about boundary setting. If they're unclear, you come in and you lay out, all right, these are the sidelines, these are our hash marks, this is where you operate. And again, there may not be a sense of we're being protected. And again, you help become the peacemaker or the protector of the team with the rest of the organization. There's different conflict handling styles. And again, you run into this, I'm sure, in some of your other training or reading. Your goal is to be able to operate effectively in all of them. At different stages of group development, there's going to be a different need for a different type of style. My advice for those of you that are married, particularly if you're a man, I now have been married for 50 years, and I finally, in the last 5 years, figured out that if I handle conflict with my wife in stage 1 and stage 2, avoiding and accommodating, my life is good. Right? But in business, we have to be able to operate in all of these. The different roles, we talked about Tuckman's stages of development. Again, Denhart lays out, all right, if you're the leader or manager, this is your job in the different stages of development. For me, I'm not a foodie. I only eat because my body says eat something. But I found out that the rest of the world really functions well around food. So your most critical job as a leader of a team at the adjourning stage is to bring food. And if it's appropriate, adult beverages sometimes help. All right, so some theories operating at the edge of teams. So some people have been doing some very interesting thought about teams. And I want to share with you some work that was done by Bill Cohen. And also for years I worked with a guy named Ken Berquist, who's a former general officer in the Army Special Forces and was a retired president of the Special Ops University. They had some interesting observations on how to lead teams in high-risk environments. So this is what they had to offer. The core principle is if you have a high-risk team, you have a very clear purpose. There's no confusion about what your mission is. You practice before you deploy, and when you're practicing, you execute quickly. This is not a time for sucking your thumb and contemplating your navel. And the more complex the mission, the simpler your plan. You want a plan with as few moving parts as possible. Here's some tips that they said that you need to do. And again, this is if you're leading a high-risk team. And high-risk teams just aren't SWAT teams or teams that are high rescue squads within a fire department. These are teams that take on issues that are highly risky to them, career-wise, and are of high risk to the organization, either from a capital standpoint or from a company reputation standpoint. So again, don't get captured by the military language I'm using. This can also apply to high-risk teams in your organization. One is to create the best. So go out and screen as rigorously as you can. Here in the university, we have a lot of union rules, policies, procedures. Work within them to try to find the best that you can. Dare the impossible. Don't get stuck with the status quo. The SAS has a great motto, who dares wins. And if you're putting together high-performing people, you gotta challenge them. Normal is gonna drive them crazy. And they're going to be taking on stuff that other people walk away from. And then once you get this mindset set, you don't waste them. And unfortunately in America, we have a history of burning out high-performing people in this environment. We tend to say, well, they were good at a very high-risk environment, let's bring them into a mundane environment, and you'll see what happens is they lose their passion. You throw away the rule book. That does not mean that you break the law. The team is very aware of what's going on in the world. They're highly inventive. They're very success-oriented. And they know that we will find a way to get it done. In some organizations I've worked with, in the conversation around throw the rule book away, I say something to the effect of just stop stupid. That there are so many idiotic policies and procedures that you have in place that are impeding success. So these teams are going to go crashing right through it. Be where the action is. You don't lead high-performing people from a desk. You lead them by being out in the field with them and being as close as possible to them. And you assume the same risks they do, and you sweat the way they do, and you suffer the way they do. You commit and you require total commitment, that you look each of your team members in the eye and you make sure that they have the fire in the belly that's necessary to keep going when things get tough, and that they have a mindset as we will find a way. You demand tough discipline, and tough discipline means that you don't violate the law. I'll be very clear. Tough discipline keeps your team focused on the boundaries that are set by the organization. You obey the law and you obey the orders that come down from above. That sound like that might be in contradiction to throw away the rule book, but this is really at the core. And General Cohen had a great story that he shared about the commander in Vietnam that was responsible for the fighter wing. And his view of the orders that were coming down from Washington where they were getting pilots killed. And he wanted the rules of engagement changed, and he lobbied for it, couldn't get it done. So he arbitrarily changed him. And he was relieved of his command and was retired out of the Air Force. And my first response was, way to go. Yeah. And Cohen said, no, that's absolutely wrong. Said what that general needed to do was to fly back to Washington and sit down with the command authority and make his case for why that needed to change. And if the command authority didn't make that change, his only course of action was to put his stars on the table and retire and not implement the order. Okay, that's what we mean by tough discipline. You want to build a commando team. This is often not an easy process. It's messy. There's high degrees of tension and conflict within those teams, but you've got to allow it to work its way out. There's a lot of profanity, a lot of other activities that take place when you put high-performing people together, and it's not just the military. I had the privilege of working with a bunch of astrophysicists, and they made special operators look like a bunch of schoolboys. They really duke it out, but they're focused on the mission. It's not pleasant, but they're a high-performing team. You want to inspire others to follow your vision. This is a picture of Bull Simon. He's most notorious for putting together the Sante raid during the Vietnam War. He had a reputation where he went to the Special Forces community and said, I need a team. And there's a high probability you're not going to come back from the mission, but the mission is critical. I want volunteers. Within 24 hours, he had more than 300 volunteers because people trusted him and they would follow his vision of the future. You accept full blame and give full credit. The guy in the pictures, Charles Beckwith, he was the commander of the Army Special Operations Group, and it was first formed during the time of the Iran hostage situation. That was a disaster. We lost a number of really good soldiers and airmen on that mission. And his first reaction was to get highly upset at the Air Wing and other folks for not doing their job. And then he finally accepted the fact that it was on him. And he came back to Washington to brief President Carter on the mission. And he broke down and said, Mr. President, I failed you. That's accepting full blame and responsibility. You need to take charge. There's a situation where if you're going to lead these teams, you got to lead. It's not a time for debate. It's not a time for an egalitarian system. You got to take charge of the conversation. You have to take charge of the behavior within the team. You have to reward effectively. So your team wants to be rewarded in a timely manner. They want it fair, and they want it tied to accomplishments. This is a picture of a U.S. Army senior parachutist who jumped on 3 combat missions. Those were very specific. You earn those stars by those jumps, and wearing those wings is highly important to you and to the organization. You make the most of what you have. You're not always going to be able to get top-tier players, so you want to establish esprit de corps. You want to accomplish a sense of common mission. You want to never give up spirit. That you want this mental toughness, which we need to be working hard from my perspective in our teams and in our organizations, because things are very challenging. That you put a team in a situation, they go in to win. A team does not go on a playing field to come in second place. Same thing in business or in your organizations. You want a team that's going out to accomplish what they need to accomplish. You want to build in a hot wash or hot wax debrief on your team's mission. This is critical. In our other seminars, we literally spent about an hour talking about the need for a very deep debrief within a team. The challenge, I now made a case for the last 10 minutes on putting together a high-performing team. The difficulty is a high-performing team will set standards that'll break good people. You have to, as a leader, help them dial it back so that they don't burn themselves out physically and emotionally. You have to be prepared for teams operating with unfiltered feedback. That's going to disrupt your human resources department critically, but that's the way they do business. I want to take a minute that the other challenge is high-performing teams are unforgiving. So when you put people into this environment, they're creating a culture that forgiveness is not part of the equation. And I put up a book called The Ether Zone. And a gentleman, Ray Morris, did a very in-depth research on the subject of an operating unit in Vietnam. And a guy named General Shelton, who was the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, served in that unit. And Ray asked the general to write the foreword to the book. And General Shelton got the galley and came back to Ray and said, "I can't do it. Your book is inaccurate." Now here's a gentleman that carefully researched the subject for 2 years or more, and now it's blown up. He finally said, "General, what's the problem?" And he said, there's a paragraph in there that said during this period of time, reconnaissance teams were led by lieutenants who performed well in those positions. And General Shelton said, "I relieved 2 of those lieutenants from their command because they couldn't do the job." So Ray changed the book, and it went forward and became a bestseller in the military journals. The point is, you had 2 young men 40 plus years ago that didn't perform well and are still not forgiven. So keep that in mind when you put teams together at this level. Here's a snapshot of teams that I had the privilege of being connected with. These old folks were part of a North Dakota State championship team. And 50-some years later, they still get together and share the fellowship of team membership. And here's a picture of a guy that I served with in the military, that a couple of old geezer professors that still, because of our team experience, get together every time I'm in Beijing. So use teams wisely, but use them.